What is the best sex-related advice your parents ever told you? Story number 1. My dad pulled me aside one day for the talk. He sat me down and said the usual stuff, but then he ended the conversation with the following quote: "If she's crazy, don't f*** her. Never stick your dick into a crazy girl. She'll make you regret it for the rest of your life. However, if she's rich enough or hot enough, I'd say just forget what I said and tap that, but not too hard. You have to be a gentleman. There's a time and a place for being rough with a woman, and that time and place should only ever be in the bedroom." I bring it up to him every now and then in front of my mom, and he always denies saying that. Story number 2. My parents, mostly my mother, talked openly about the anatomy of sexual intercourse since I was very young. When I tell people how old I was when I found out what sex was, they usually seem horrified and worry that it must have made me have sex early, but no. In reality, because it wasn't a curiosity thing and it wasn't shamed, I didn't have sex with a man until I was 20, and I was 17 when I was with another woman. I probably would have waited to be with women too until I was older had it not been such a curious thing for me. What is classified as sex between two girls, being non-straight, was not shamed either. I always was comfortable with my body as well because both of my parents didn't hide their own bodies or act like nudity was bad, so when it came to showing my body to others, it didn't feel like a big deal. It was just the actual touching, feeling, that was big to me. When I finally had intercourse with a man, sex with a woman. And I was 6 when I learned how babies were made. I don't remember the context, but I vaguely remember my mom telling me a penis goes into a vagina and that's what sex is, and sex is how a baby is made. At 6, I simply thought that was gross and weird, and I didn't understand why adults would it, so I just said okay and carried on. However, my mom would tease me that I knew what sex was in front of other adults. She'd ask, "Where do babies come from? Tell them." And I didn't want to say it because she was making a scene out of it. Thinking back, she did that kind of shit a lot. But I'm glad overall that my mother was open about it. My father was quiet about it after a while. Once he divorced my mother, once my sisters and I were teenagers. He didn't talk about it, unless we brought it up first, but he knew that we knew most things. The only time it was ever really brought up was to say to not mention that stuff because my younger stepsister by a year didn't know everything. Story number 3. When I turned 13 and went to high school, my parents told me to always be careful when I was with a girl alone. Unless I trusted her, they said to always try to be in public with her or have someone else in the room. Their reasoning was that girls are told to not be alone with guys for fear of rape or sexual assault. They told me to not be alone with a girl in case the girl lies. This was back in 2009 or so. Now I know that falsified sexual charges are much rarer than actual ones, but this has actually saved me twice. Once was just a drunk girl wanting to be alone with me, and my roommate from college happened to be outside the bathroom of where she ended up accusing me of some stuff happening. Nothing did, but she tried to tell a few of her friends it did. The other saved me when I worked in a hotel. I had an obviously drunk woman who was hiding in the hotel to avoid him, saying he had abused her, so we put her in a room that she paid for with cash, and she asked for me, since I checked her in, to walk her from her car to her room since she didn't feel safe being alone. In hindsight, I should have just had security do it, but they were focusing on a different event, so I took it on myself. Anyways, I got into the elevator with her and put my phone on record in my pocket. She opened herself up to me, complaining about the guy and trying to hug me, and I managed to say, "Sorry, ma'am, we're not allowed to hug guests." I left that night, glad I wouldn't be coming in again until after checkout for next day. When I came back in, they told me that her husband had come to the hotel and picked her up in the morning, and that she said I had checked her in and forced her to take me up to her room after checking her in. She didn't accuse me of anything more than that, but when I came to work, my manager, who had been there last night and saw it all, said she didn't believe that in my recording helped me get out of that. So it doesn't help often, this advice, but when it does, it definitely does. Story number 4. My mom always told me that there's no need to wait until marriage to have sex, but emphasized that I should do it with someone I know well, love, and trust completely. Unfortunately, I lost my virginity in a stupid way and wish to God I had just held on a little longer, so my first time would have been with my husband. Not because I wanted to wait until marriage or anything, but I wish I could have lost my virginity to someone that I actually loved and trusted. So I will definitely give the same advice to my kids and share my regrets. No need to wait until marriage, but it is worth waiting until you find someone you genuinely have a trusting bond with. Story number 5. My dad gave me a book about sex written for children when I was about 12. Then he asked me if I had any questions. I was very shy and embarrassed, an only girl who didn't have boyfriends and was pretty much scared of them. I said no, and that was the end of that. He and I never discussed it again. My mother said nothing. I never had a date in high school, and dating was sporadic in college. I rid myself of my virginity when I was 26 and grew to find out that I was very sexual and orgasmic with my second husband. I made sure to be open with my son because I wanted him to know that sex is amazing. I think the best thing I told him was to make sure his partner is satisfied. Story number 6. When was growing up, my dad ended the talk with putting a box of condoms on my dresser and said, if you're going to have sex, use these, then put a pregnancy test beside it, and said, don't use this. He then said, if you need more of these condoms, put the empty box on my dresses and I will get you more. Understood. It seemed like a good way to finish it off. When he said not to use the pregnancy test, I understood that it was I hope you don't have to use this. He was very open and available for any questions I had regarding sex. I hope to provide my son the same support when the time comes. Story number 7. As a teen girl, I was constantly dying of embarrassment because my parents were really sex positive and answered questions accurately. My friends would always worm their way into the kitchen to ask my mom about sex-related pleasure, her specialty. My dad was Mr. Contraceptive. We literally had vases full of various types, brands of condoms. My dad still knows more about birth control than I ever will. The one thing that stuck, she always said every guy I took to bed would need to be taught how to get me off. So I better get really good at communicating, and the best reason to dump a guy was when he wasn't receptive to learning new things in bed. I'm not sure how it even happened, but I have become the sex-positive parent of teenagers and all their friends. My husband is still slightly mortified that I will discuss sex with anyone, but he's supportive. Our daughter is hideously embarrassed, so I'm banking on her carrying on the family legacy. Our son just rolls with it. Nothing phases him. I could and should write a book about just how misinformed teens of overtly religious people are. Y'all would never believe the crazy shit these kids come to with.